Today, let us talk about the CV-18 Fujian, China's newest aircraft carrier, and why its commissioning in November 2025 marks the moment Beijing became the second nation on Earth to operate electromagnetic catapults at sea. This is not simply another warship entering service. This is a technological leap that bypassed an entire generation of carrier development, and it fundamentally changes what the People's Liberation Army Navy can do with its aircraft far from Chinese shores. For decades, China had no aircraft carriers at all. The country that now operates the world's largest navy by hull count spent most of the Cold War focused on coastal defense, submarines, and land-based missile systems. Aircraft carriers were dismissed as expensive symbols of American imperialism, floating targets that would be irrelevant in any conflict over Taiwan or the South China Sea. That changed in 1998, when a Macau-based company secretly fronting for the People's Liberation Army Navy purchased the unfinished Soviet carrier Varyag from Ukraine for just $20 million. The Hulk sat 68% complete, stripped of its engines and weapons, but it represented something China desperately wanted: the ability to study, reverse engineer, and eventually build carriers of its own. After years of refurbishment at Dalian Shipyard, that vessel was commissioned in September 2012 as the Liaoning, China's first aircraft carrier. 7 years later, in December 2019, China's second carrier, the Shandong, entered service as the first domestically built flat-top. Both ships used ski jump ramps inherited from Soviet design philosophy, which limited what kinds of aircraft they could launch and how much fuel and weaponry those aircraft could carry. Neither could operate fixed-wing early warning planes, a critical limitation for modern carrier warfare. Which brings us to November 2025, when everything changed. On November 5, 2025, President Xi Jinping personally attended the commissioning ceremony for the CV-18 Fujian at Yulin Naval Base in Hainan. He was filmed pressing the electromagnetic catapult launch button inside the flight deck control room. That symbolic gesture underscored what this ship represents. The Fujian is China's first Kato bar carrier, meaning it uses catapults for takeoff and arresting wires for recovery. More significantly, those catapults are electromagnetic rather than steam-powered, making the Fujian only the second operational warship in history after the USS Gerald R. Ford to use this technology. At over 80,000 tons displacement, equipped with 3 electromagnetic catapults, and capable of launching stealth fighters and fixed-wing early warning aircraft, the Fujian represents the most consequential single addition to Chinese naval capability in decades. It is not merely an incremental improvement. It is China's announcement that it intends to compete with the United States for dominance across the Pacific. For China, the decision to equip the Fujian with electromagnetic catapults rather than steam systems can be justified by 3 factors, each of which reveals something important about Beijing's strategic calculus. The first factor is operational flexibility. Traditional steam catapults generate enormous power, but they cannot precisely control the force applied to each aircraft. Light drones may be damaged by excessive acceleration, while heavy fighters sometimes receive insufficient thrust. Electromagnetic aircraft launch systems, called EMALS, solve this problem through feedback-controlled acceleration. The system uses a linear induction motor to create alternating magnetic fields along a track, propelling a shuttle connected to the aircraft nose gear. Operators can adjust launch energy for each aircraft type, from lightweight unmanned systems to fully loaded strike fighters carrying maximum fuel and ordnance. This flexibility matters enormously for the Fujian because China's planned air wing includes the J-35 stealth fighter, the J-15T multi-role aircraft, and the KJ-600 fixed-wing early warning plane. We will get into the specific capabilities of each aircraft later, but for now the key point is that EMALS allows the Fujian to operate all 3 efficiently from the same deck. The second factor is maintenance and reliability. Steam catapults require complex plumbing networks, high-pressure vessels, and desalination plants to produce steam-quality fresh water. They are maintenance-intensive systems that convert only 4 to 6% of steam energy into useful work. EMALS eliminates most of this infrastructure, replacing it with electrical components that are theoretically easier to maintain and diagnose. Chinese state media has claimed their EMALS achieves a failure rate below 0.2%, attributed to independent power modules for each catapult rather than a shared power architecture. This claim has not been independently verified and comes exclusively from Chinese sources, so it deserves healthy skepticism. What we can say with more confidence is that EMALS recharges faster than steam repressurizes, potentially allowing higher sortie rates over sustained operations. The third factor is technological leapfrogging. China made a deliberate choice to bypass steam catapult development entirely. Rather than spending decades perfecting technology from the 1950s that the United States had already mastered, Beijing jumped directly from ski jump ramps to electromagnetic launch. This approach carried significant risk, as it required developing a working electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS, from scratch while simultaneously designing a carrier to accommodate it. But if successful, it would allow China to field a capability that only the United States Navy currently possesses. The gamble appears to have paid off, though questions remain about long-term reliability under sustained combat conditions. What enabled this leapfrog was a technological breakthrough that most Western analysts had assumed was impossible. It involved operating EMALS from a conventionally powered carrier. The Fujian does not have nuclear reactors. Instead, it uses a medium-voltage direct current integrated power system, the first of its kind on any aircraft carrier, to generate sufficient electricity for electromagnetic catapults using conventional steam turbines and diesel generators. This brings us to the man who made it possible, but that story requires its own section. China is not the only nation watching the Fujian with intense interest. The carrier's commissioning has triggered responses across the Indo-Pacific that reveal just how seriously regional powers are taking this development. Japan's reaction was perhaps the most dramatic. On November 7, 2025, just 2 days after the commissioning ceremony, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi stated publicly that a Chinese naval blockade or invasion of Taiwan would constitute a survival-threatening situation, justifying Japan's exercise of collective self-defense. This triggered an immediate diplomatic crisis with Beijing. Chinese Ministry of National Defense spokesperson Zhang Bin dismissed Japanese media speculation about countering the Fujian as sheer fantasy and an overestimation of one's own abilities. But the underlying concern is real. Japan has spent decades operating within American security guarantees, but the Fujian represents a capability that could challenge those guarantees directly. But perhaps the most interesting case is not Japan at all. It is India. New Delhi has watched China's carrier program with growing alarm, particularly given Chinese naval expansion into the Indian Ocean through facilities in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Djibouti. The Fujian's ability to operate far from Chinese shores, sustained by underway replenishment rather than forward bases, raises the prospect of Chinese carrier strike groups conducting extended deployments in waters India has traditionally considered its sphere of influence. In response, India is equipping its newest carrier, the INS Vikrant, with French Rafale M fighters, a significant upgrade over its previous air wing. I will not speculate on whether this is sufficient to match Chinese capabilities. India's naval procurement decisions over the next decade will be shaped significantly by what the Fujian demonstrates it can do. As a side note, one detail often overlooked in Western coverage is that the Philippines, one of the smaller nations directly affected by Chinese maritime expansion in the South China Sea, has responded to the Fujian's commissioning by expanding defense partnerships with Japan, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Manila cannot match Beijing's naval power directly, but it is actively building a coalition of partners who might collectively offset that advantage. Whether this coalition proves effective remains to be seen, but it represents exactly the kind of response China's carrier program was designed to deter. The Pentagon's assessment, released in its December 2025 annual report on Chinese military power, described the Fujian as one of the most significant Chinese military developments of the year. More strikingly, the report projected that China aims to field 9 aircraft carriers by 2035, enough for a continuous 3-carrier rotation with reserves. This would represent a transformation in Chinese power projection capability that has no precedent since the Soviet Union. To understand why the Fujian was built the way it was, we need to go back to the beginning, back to why China decided electromagnetic catapults were worth the risk. The core problem was straightforward. Ski jump carriers could not do what China needed carriers to do. The Liaoning and Shandong both use short takeoff, but arrested recovery, known as stow-bar, operations. Aircraft roll up a curved ramp at the bow, using their own engine thrust plus the momentum from the ramp angle to get airborne. This works, but it imposes severe limits. Fighters must launch with reduced fuel and weapons loads because they cannot achieve sufficient speed on the short deck run. More critically, ski jump carriers cannot launch heavy fixed-wing aircraft such as airborne early warning planes. The KJ-600, China's equivalent to the American E-2D Hawkeye, is simply too heavy for ski jump takeoff. Without airborne early warning, previous Chinese carriers relied on helicopters for over-the-horizon radar coverage, a severe constraint that limited how effectively they could coordinate fleet air defense and offensive operations. What the new approach needed to achieve was simple in concept, but extraordinarily difficult in execution. Launch the KJ-600, launch fully loaded fighters, launch drones, and do it all from the same deck with minimal turnaround time. Catapults were the only answer, and electromagnetic catapults offered advantages over steam that made them worth the development risk. The question was whether China could make them work. The Fujian's technical specifications reveal a ship designed to bridge the gap between China's previous carriers and American supercarriers, though important differences remain. Beginning with basic dimensions, the Fujian displaces more than 80,000 tons at full load according to official Chinese statements, with analyst estimates ranging up to 85,000 tons. It measures approximately 316 meters in overall length with a flight deck beam of roughly 76 meters. For comparison, the USS Gerald R. Ford displaces approximately 100,000 tons and measures 333 meters in length. The Fujian is roughly 80% the size of America's newest carrier, making it comparable to the retired Kitty Hawk class and substantially larger than any non-American carrier afloat, including Britain's Queen Elizabeth class at 65,000 tons and France's Charles de Gaulle at 42,000 tons. The propulsion system is conventional rather than nuclear, using steam turbines with diesel generators driving 4 shafts. Analyst estimates suggest a top speed of 31 to 35 knots and a range of approximately 10,000 nautical miles. This is the Fujian's most debated design choice. Conventional propulsion limits operational endurance to 2 to 3 weeks of high-tempo operations before refueling, whereas nuclear carriers can operate for decades without reactor refueling. However, this constraint was partially offset by the medium-voltage direct current integrated power system developed by Rear Admiral May Wyming and his team at the People's Liberation Army Naval University of Engineering in Wuhan. Ma, sometimes called Magneto by Chinese military enthusiasts, spent 2 decades developing ship power technologies based on direct current. His breakthrough was demonstrating that EMALS could function effectively using a direct current motor with supercapacitor energy storage, rather than an alternating current motor with flywheel storage used on American carriers. This direct current approach, integrated through the medium voltage direct current power network, generates sufficient electricity for electromagnetic catapults without requiring nuclear reactors. The electromagnetic catapult system itself consists of 3 launch tracks positioned on the bow and waist of the flight deck. Each catapult uses a linear induction motor rather than steam pressure to accelerate aircraft to launch speed. Chinese sources claim a 45-second interval between launches and a sortie rate of 12.5 aircraft per hour, though these figures come from state media and have not been independently verified. EMALS is the common name for this technology. For comparison, the Ford class was designed to achieve a similar sortie rate with 4 catapults, though early reliability issues have prevented the American ship from reaching design targets. The Ford's EMALS achieved only between 460 and 614 mean cycles between operational mission failures as of 2022, far below the 4,166 cycle design target. The air wing represents the most operationally significant upgrade over previous Chinese carriers. The Fujian can operate an estimated 40-plus fixed-wing aircraft and approximately 12 helicopters. The primary fighter is the J-15T, a catapult-capable variant of the Flying Shark, which itself was derived from the Soviet Su-33. The more consequential addition is the J-35, a twin-engine fifth-generation stealth fighter that became the world's first stealth aircraft, launched by Electromagnetic Catapult when it conducted flight tests during the Fujian's 8th sea trial in May 2025. The J-35 offers low observable characteristics that the J-15 lacks, potentially allowing it to penetrate defended airspace more effectively. But the single most distinctive feature of the Fujian's air wing is the KJ-600 Nezha, China's first fixed-wing carrier-based airborne early warning aircraft. This aircraft, roughly analogous to the American E-2D Hawkeye, extends radar coverage hundreds of kilometers beyond the horizon. Previous Chinese carriers relied entirely on helicopters for airborne early warning, which limited both range and endurance. The KJ-600 provides the command and control backbone required for a modern carrier strike group to operate effectively in contested airspace. It is arguably the capability that justifies everything else about the Fujian's design. The flight deck layout does have acknowledged weaknesses. In early 2026, the Chinese military journal Shipborne Weapons Defense Review published a candid assessment identifying design compromises stemming from the late switch from steam to electromagnetic catapults. The longer EMALS tracks disrupted the originally planned deck configuration. One catapult intrudes into the angled landing area, another sits too close to an aircraft elevator, and the island superstructure is positioned closer to the flight deck centerline than on comparable American carriers. The landing angle is only 6 degrees off centerline versus 9 degrees on American carriers. Former U.S. Navy Captain Carl Schuster assessed that these constraints limit the Fujian's sortie generation rate to roughly 60% of a 50-year-old Nimitz-class carrier. These limits stem not from a fundamentally poor design, but from compromises created by a late change that could not be fully resolved before construction advanced too far. So when you combine a displacement exceeding 80,000 tons, 3 electromagnetic catapults capable of launching stealth fighters and early warning aircraft, a revolutionary MVDC power system that enables EMALS operation without nuclear reactors, and an air wing that finally gives China fixed-wing carrier-based radar coverage, you get something that defies easy categorization. The Fujian is not a supercarrier on par with the Gerald R. Ford. It is not a light carrier like Britain's Queen Elizabeth. It is something in between, a transitional design that demonstrates China can master cutting-edge naval aviation technology while revealing the compromises inherent in doing so at this pace. What makes this significant is not simply the Fujian itself, but what it represents about trajectory. China went from purchasing a rusting, engine-stripped hull in 1998 to commissioning a domestically designed electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS-equipped carrier, in 2025. That is a 27-year arc representing one of the most rapid naval capability buildups in modern history. The lessons learned from the Fujian will inform the Type 004, reportedly already under construction at Dalian Shipyard, with what satellite imagery suggests are nuclear reactor containment structures. That ship is expected to displace over 100,000 tons with 4 electromagnetic catapults. The Fujian is excellent as a platform for power projection beyond the first island chain, but it can also serve as a training ship for the next generation of Chinese carrier aviators and as a testbed for technologies that will appear on future vessels. That flexibility is precisely why Japan is reconsidering its defense posture, why India is upgrading its carrier air wings, and why the Pentagon projects China will field 9 carriers within a decade. And that is exactly why every naval strategist from Washington to New Delhi to Tokyo is paying very close attention to what the Fujian does next.